onto stitching. Again, I am absolutely no expert in any of this, especially when it comes to stitching. There are some guys out there that make doing saddle stitch, because that's what we're going to do on this. That's an art form by itself. What we're going to do first is I'm going to go back around and repunch all these stitch holes around my stitch line to punch through the back of this piece of leather now that it's connected. So I'm going to grab my pricking fork or stitching tool, whichever you want to call it, and we're going to start. What I normally do is I start somewhere on the back. I make the first 3 holes a little bit wider, because when you saddle stitch you have to run a back stitch so they'll hold, and we'll get into that once I start stitching. All the holes have been repunched and we're getting ready to start doing the saddle stitch. And the needles I'm using for this are John James. They seem to be the most prevalent needles when it comes to saddle stitching, what most people are using anyway. It's a blunt needle. It's not really that sharp, with a small eyelet. I don't know if you can see it or not. So that's the needles, and what I'm using is wax cotton thread, 1 millimeter. I'm using the cotton. That's what I started with because it was just the easiest to find around here. I didn't want to go all the way to Tandy. A lot of guys are using the bonded nylon, which I'm going to try here in the future. It's just I need to go get out and find some, but this wax cotton has been working pretty well for me, so I'm going to stick with it for a while, and I have a little bit left. Okay, the amount of thread that you're going to need for your project, what people say online is whatever the distance is for your stitching, go around it 2 or 3 times. I've tried that, and I came other times I've come up 3 feet too long. Thread's pretty inexpensive, so the way I look at it is whatever I think I need, I just add about another 2 feet. Either make a whole a stitching pony or buy one. Tandy, they're 30 bucks online. I made this one. It cost me about $10 in material. It makes your life a whole lot easier, and on top of that, it'll make you a lot more consistent with your stitching, which I didn't believe at first. I was kind of closing it in between my legs and trying to stitch it up, and very inconsistent. So do yourself a favor, just get one of these. So what you do with these is you put them between your legs, and now you have something to hold your project while you're stitching. Sorry about all the paint, guys. It seems like every time I make these videos, I've been painting a house, so it seems like every time I make these videos, this is the garb I'm in. I do dress up nice, and I do clean up well, but apparently not for YouTube videos. Let me grab the piece here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our holster, and we're going to put it right in between these jaws. Take your string or your thread and your needle, take some out, cut it, thread 2 needles. Take it through the first hole, pull it through the other side, and like you would a pair of sneakers or shoes, tennis shoes, pull the thread tight until you have an equal amount on both sides. Just like that. Like I said earlier, guys, I am absolutely no professional at this whatsoever. I'm just learning as I go, basically. See if we can come in a little bit tighter here. Basically what you do, I always start on the good side and work to the inside. You don't have to do that. I just prefer to do that. Now some guys work out here and work their way to themselves. I seem to do better if I work this way and go that way. It's just personal preference. There's a few guys online who are very experienced, and basically what they say is when you put the needle through, well, let's do the first one. Push the needle through. Let's turn it back this way. There we go. Okay, so the first one, you push the needle through and pull it. Now because I do have a stitching awl, but I don't really, I punch my holes ahead of time so they're a little bit tighter. So what I do is I just take a pair of small vice grips, I put tape on the end so it doesn't mar up the needle, and I just pull them through like that. A lot of guys use that awl. Ooh, that was a little tough on that one. Alright, so I got my first one through. Now what a lot of guys say to do on a true saddle stitch is you put your first one through, you take this one and you put it underneath. I haven't had good luck with that. Mine have been very inconsistent doing that. So what I do is basically I call it a modified saddle stitch. Instead of putting it top and bottom, I put it in front and back. So the first one goes through. I always take my second one. I don't know if we can get this on camera or not. I always take my second needle and I put it in front of that thread. Now what you have to be careful with is to watch these right here, because a lot of times you'll stab this thread, and once you pull it through, they're basically connected. Then you got to pull it apart and try to trim it off, and if you break this, you got to start all over. So just be careful of that. So what I do, just pull that through. Now equal amounts. Let me widen this out a little bit. Whoa, sorry, wrong way. So we have them between the first hole. Equal amounts, pull them tight. And just keep pulling. Now I use a lot of thread on this only because I don't want to be short, and thread, I mean, it was like $3 for 25 yards, so it's not that expensive. So once you get it tight, just give it a little tug. That's what I do. And then on to your second hole. Push it through. See, that one came right through. I didn't even need the pliers for that one. Put it in front. And you don't want to be first one in front of the thread and the next one behind the thread and the next one on top and below. Your stitches will come out they won't be real, you know, they won't be consistent. And that's all you do. If you really want some information on saddle stitch, Google it, go on YouTube. There's a few guys, Nigel, his name is Nigel, I can't remember his last name, but just Google saddle stitch and his channel will come up, and he is definitely a master leather crafter. He gives you a lot of good examples and teaches you the true way of doing the saddle stitch. We're at the end. Remember in the beginning of the video I opened up these 3 holes a little wider with my awl. And when I stitched these 3 up, I gave them an extra little tug. Not hard enough to break the thread, but hard enough just to kind of sink them down a little bit more, because I'm going to take this and go back three stitches to back stitch this. And here's the first part of the stitching all done. It's all complete. It took me about an hour, hour and a half to do the stitching. Hopefully I can give you some close-ups of it. It'll come out on camera. Not too bad. Like I said earlier, it's not a true saddle stitch because of the groove that I create. It kind of follows that groove line. But I really think it's alright. It's neat and tidy anyway. And the back stitching is the part where I try to hide the most, and that's right here. If you see on the back, that's where it'll be. What I'll do is I'll put a little wax on there, I'll melt it, and it'll be fine. The best part about a saddle stitch is if one of these starts to fray and come undone, it's not like a sewing stitch where the whole thing will start to fray, because they're interlocked, and they interlock through the holes. We're going to go on to the next process, which is wetting it a little bit just to bend it over to start the forming process, and then we'll put the other stitch on when I fold it. The first part of the stitching is done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start bending it to make it start to look like a holster. Bending it when it's dry, it's real stiff right now, so it needs a little persuasion. So what I use is water. I'll wet it down and we'll start to bend it and mold it. And the reason I'm using the spray bottle is the water here in Florida it's so bad that I was running it under the tap and I was starting to get stains on the leather from the water. So what I did is I filtered it and put it in the spray bottle. Once I start to form it for the first step, I'll take the gun, which is empty and clear. Nothing in there. I'll just rough form it just enough to give me the outline of where the trigger guard is, so when I fold it and then we let it dry, and then when I contact cement it together, I'll have a little bit of that trigger guard form, and I can run a stitch line to that, then we'll wet it again and I'll really start to form the holster to the gun. So let me just get that out of the way for now. I don't want it getting too wet. Basically what I'm going to do is just start wetting it. And what I do is I wet the whole thing, because if you only wet part of it, you'll see a difference, a little bit of difference in the color of the leather, so I wet the whole thing. And then once we fold it, start to fold it, I'll let it dry overnight in front of a fan. And this is the area where you really want to get wet, right here. The outside's not so much, but we'll let it sit for a couple seconds, and we're going to slowly start to work this over. Hopefully I can get it on camera. If we did this dry, it would be very hard to do, so I persuade it with a little bit of water, and it's not going to hurt it any. And I try to get it as close as I can with these corners. Hey, look at that, it's starting to look like a holster. Imagine that. So what I'll do is I'll keep prying it and bending it. Once I work at it a little while, I'll start. Now if you don't feel comfortable putting your gun into a wet holster, you can wrap it with saran wrap. When I do the final forming on the holster itself, it's in there for about 45 minutes, maybe even an hour to form it around the holster. I do wrap it with saran wrap, but this, for a few minutes in here, I'll just tear the gun apart really quick and just, dry it off and re-oil it. So if you don't feel comfortable doing that, wrap it in saran wrap. It won't affect the holster any. It won't make it too big or anything. So, alright, so now what I'll do is I'll kind of test fit where the gun is going to go. Get it somewhat close. Now what I'll do is I'll make sure these ends line up, and I'll just start pressing it down just a little bit, just to give me an outline of the trigger guard, so I have something to, an outline to kind of stitch to. Alright, I worked it just a little bit. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but you can see a faint line of the trigger guard and where the barrel comes down. Also inside, you can see, after I pressed a little bit, I have on both sides the actual outline of the trigger guard. So when I apply the contact cement, I'll go right up to right about here and around. I'll clamp them, and then I'll have a pretty good stitch line. I'll go 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch off of that line on the outside and make a stitch line. So we're pretty close right there. It's starting to look pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just put a small couple clamps on here just for a little while so it'll keep this shape. I'm going to put it in front of the fan for 24 hours and let it dry thoroughly. That'll do it for this part. Thanks for watching. Hope everybody's safe out there and have a great night. I'll talk to you soon.